the new Aquaclears are out. And unlike some folks, I didn't get them ahead of time, but I recently picked a few up, and we're going to put them to the test. But first, let's unbox them and take a look at the differences between the 110, the 70, and the 50 really quickly. And then we'll talk about how I'm going to test these things and compare them to the original Aquaclear. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. And today we're going to talk about the new version of the Aquaclear. For many, this is like the king of the hang-on back filters, unless you're John from KG Tropicals, who thinks it's the title. And we might be able to prove really quickly why the title can't possibly be the king of the filters. Calling you out, John, is basically what I just said. No, it all depends on use, but it's so green, right? New Aquaclear, there's a lot of changes, a lot less changes to the AC-110, so let's get this bad boy open and look at it, and then compare it to the smaller versions of the Aquaclear and see where those changes lie. Okay, we got an unbox. So, like the previous Aquaclears, we're relying on this big old kind of U-shaped tube. I'm not making the same pun. But, again, like the previous Aquaclears, there's one kind of downside, which is that you're reliant on this little stopper down in the filter itself and sliding it in and out of a gate to alter your flow. Not as good as the C-Chem title, let's be honest. That's probably the part where the title's winning. But the newest innovation is really not that much of an innovation, but that they're including a pre-filter sponge. Now, on an Aquaclear 110, this tiny little thing is going to clog up extremely fast. But there's a more important difference. If you'll notice on the end here, we'll bring it up close. These used to taper off to a much smaller point. And you can see it's a much smoother taper. Now, realistically, I would have preferred they just had it squared off for the purposes of the pre-filter, but this is designed to help get the pre-filter in place, because the way that they've got it done, it just has, instead of a hole, it has slits, so that you can just slide it on. Either way, they're on both sides, and they do go all the way through, so you could, in theory, push this all the way out, but, you know, the whole goal here is just to have something covering your intake. And including that by default is really nice. Again, on an Aquaclear 110, this little guy is probably going to have to get cleaned like every day or two. A lot. I'm probably not going to use this little guy. I'm going to use a much larger pre-filter sponge, like I've done on all my other Aquaclears. But this change here actually could make it so that when you do have a pre-filter sponge, it doesn't suction on quite as tightly. And a lot of you know what I'm talking about if you had an Aquaclear, where when this starts to clog up, it kind of just pinches in toward the middle and causes a massive loss in suction because it's so pinched in, it's so gunked up in that one area of the sponge. This will help mitigate that a little bit. Unfortunately for the 110, we still have this kind of silly leveler that levels on the back of your tank. And then, again, one of the changes they didn't do is the lid is still solid. On the other ones, they have holes in them to help mitigate the noise, but some of the redesign in this and the way that it sits on is supposed to prevent the dreaded Aquaclear rattle that a lot of people complain about. Let's get on to the other major change. Everybody who's looked at one of this has talked about it, but that little slope actually matters. Instead of being a completely like 90-degree angle U like the old one used to be, this helps prevent some of the issues with self-priming. Now, I can't confirm whether or not the actual the motor in it is different, but it is still outside of the aquarium, which means that in theory, in power outages, you could run into priming issues. We'll do a number of tests around that, but this is going to help. That little slope will help deliver the water more efficiently and make priming a little simpler on the motor itself. Beyond that, most of the Aquaclear is exactly the same, except for one major thing. So you still got the same kind of media basket, enormous jumbo sponge, although now they're blue instead of kind of a tannish color. Here's the big difference. See how much flex it has? And this is with the media tray in it. One of the problems that the original Aquaclear had is that this plastic that makes the body is really rigid. And some accidental bumps walking around your fish room, crack. Very, very common problem. Anybody that's had an Aquaclear is either afraid of it or has done it. With this new plastic, kind of think of this like, honestly, like the plastic that's used in these, where it's a little bit more flexible. It's not quite as flexible as the Tidal, but this increased flexibility, I mean, you can see me doing this, and if I'd have done this with the old Aquaclear, I'd have cracked it by now. Just plain and simple. So those couple of changes are really nice. And other than that, it's the same old reliable filter you're used to until you get to the smaller models. So let's put away the big boy, talk about the smaller models, and then we'll talk about how we're testing these things. Let's dig into the 70. So the first thing we're going to notice with the AC70 and the smaller models as well, we don't really need to open a 50 to show this, but just understand that it applies to all the smaller models. The porting. So when we first saw this, it's kind of silly that this just sits there lightly and isn't actually fully installed with this little guy right here. Anyway, the porting here helps vent, basically. Because one of the problems is with the water pressure continuously happening with the old lids, they would eventually start to rattle. But by having this porting present, that buildup of pressure with the water doesn't occur, and these should not rattle anymore. That was one of the major fixes that Fluval did to the Aquaclear. Now, the concern is that they'll be noisier than the original Aquaclears, but I have a feeling if you maintain your water levels, that's not going to happen. We'll find out when we do the full testing. Much like the AC110, same tubing. Right, I just had this attached the other way, but this is the first extension tube. You'll notice that it doesn't have this here. Makes it a little simpler so that you don't have the potential of getting anything clogged in the middle of your tube. Realistically, you can just disassemble them and clean them. It doesn't take that much work, but it's a small quality of life fix. And again, the same taper to help prevent issues with priming. Here's the real change. Can you see it already? Look at the media tray. So the AC110 still uses the old style tray where it's basically just this and two sections and you put stuff together, where this has a built-in divider set so that when you look at it, say top down, you'll have your sponge in the bottom and then media slots into each side of this. Now with the Aquaclear 110, you're just going to lay them in like you always did, but with these, you have a kind of dedicated space to assemble that extra stuff. And each Aquaclear filter comes with a little package of additional media. This is the one from the 110, but it's the same, just appropriately sized for each one. And what they give you is carbon and biomax to go along with your foam. So if we open this bad boy up, you're going to see I've got a couple packs of carbon and two nice bags of their biomax media. So this allows you, because you have both, to kit out the filter kind of however you want to. I am curious if the 50 and smaller comes with a similar amount of media. We'll find out when we actually go through and set them up, and we'll have a full video on that. But the 70 and the 110 both come with enough to where you could put both things of carbon, both things of biomax media, or 1 and 1. They give you 2 of each bag to make it so that you can fit multiple, which is nice. It means that you can kind of kit this out however you want to. In the case of the AC110, a really popular thing used to be is buy an additional sponge and just put 2 sponges in it and not worry about any other media. Because of that divider, it might be a little tougher to fit sponge in both chambers of the AC70, but I'm sure with a little ingenuity we could figure it out, right? It's pretty easy to pack some sponge in if you really need to. However, the Aquaclear sponges have always been really, really good because they're dense, they're not overly coarse, and they frankly just hold a ton of gunk. So I don't think it's necessary to put 2 in a lot of the smaller ones, but for those that like doing that, you can still probably configure it. It's just going to take a little extra work. Let's talk about how we're going to test these things. For the AC110, because it's not too much different than an actual old 110, I'm going to go ahead and just put it onto one of my existing tanks that has an AC110 currently. And I will just monitor its progress. And you might be like, well, there's not a side-by-side, but I've been using that same Aquaclear filter on that tank for like 5 years at this point. So I'm really familiar with some of the problems, some of the benefits, and just how it operates for that particular tank. And that tank will be my Running River tank, the one that's right over that way. And we'll just basically swap the filters out. We'll take the old Aquaclear off, we'll put the new Aquaclear on, we'll get it all powered up, fired up, and it'll be good to go. Because it has an old Aquaclear sponge in it and a bunch of media, what I'm actually going to do is double up the sponges and run 2 sponges. I used to run a thing of ceramic media, but honestly, that tank doesn't need it. It has so much biomass within it that needing biomedia is unnecessary. 2 sponges will definitely do the trick, and more importantly, it lets us kind of precede the filter. Even though that tank is well established, it'll mean that 1 sponge is ready to go and the other one will populate relatively quickly. And like that filter, I'm going to use one of the larger intake sponges, the ones Aquarium Co-op sells, because I've been using it on that tank for the entire time it's been installed, so no sense in changing it now. But for the AC50 and the AC70, this is going to be a very different test, and we're going to test how it compares directly to the Tidal. And let me explain that test. On my pleco tank, my 30 breeder pleco tank that has my Wabbenmooster plecos that used to breed and now kind of just occasionally throw eggs out and never make actual babies. But what's important here is they're messy and they don't have any plants. They're in a bare bottom tank. They have a bit of algae, mostly some kind of Cladophora style hair algae. But what ends up happening is that stuff regularly gets in through the skimmer portion of the Tidal and causes all sorts of havoc. I have to maintain that thing pretty regularly. With the Aquaclears, because we can have a pre-filter on them that will actually pre-filter all of the intake as opposed to only one portion and not the skimmer portion, which brings in a majority of the water, we should be able to prevent that from ever happening and minimize the amount of maintenance that has to happen on our Aquaclears. To really test this out, currently there's a Tidal 75 sitting on that tank. I'm going to put both the AC50 and the AC70 on that tank at the same time. Now, I will put just one on at first, and I'll leave the current Tidal in place. I'll put the AC50 on for about a week. That'll help it propagate, so I don't have to risk any loss or spikes or anything like that. There's a fair number of plecos in this tank. It gets plenty of water changes, but they make a lot of mess. They make a lot of poop. They are ancistrous plecos. They eat a lot. And they have wood that they rasp on to create more debris. Then, after about a week, we'll remove the Tidal 75 and install the other Aquaclear, the Aquaclear 70. So we'll have both the 50 and the 70, create a bunch of flow, but we'll mitigate that flow down because we don't need full-time flow from both filters. That'll create a small vortex in that little tank. However, what this will do is test whether or not the smaller version has any differences in the rate in which it plugs up compared to the 70, considering they're both working on the same tank. And that will kind of unify the flow within this tank by creating a bit more water churn and movement as long as I angle everything correctly. Here's where this gets interesting. Because that tank puts off so much mess, and they make a reasonable amount of like Cladophora algae in there, I'm constantly picking up big chunks. This is where the test against the Tidal really matters, and where one of the scenarios where you could say that the Tidal actually really sucks is when you're dealing with hair algae problems or heavy plant masses and you have any kind of plant die-off, and that skimmer actually becomes your enemy because tons of stuff will get clogged into the pump motor itself because the pump sits within the aquarium and there's no way to block that off without some really serious modifications. Didn't think about that one, did you, John? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. John has a lot of reasons why he should like the Tidal, and it has to do with some of the fish he keeps. But some of us lazier fish keepers, who basically maintenance the thing when flow starts to die down, will be able to see some difference in the results in where some of the hang-ups of the Tidal happen. And of course, when the water level gets low because you work too much, you won't have that obnoxious loud noise bothering your wife. My wife puts up with a lot. So that's going to be our couple of tests. We'll probably let these run for about a month, and then I'll do a check-in. And then after that, of course, we'll just keep them running unless some major catastrophe happens and we have to change filters. Hopefully not. So that's it. I want to do a quick walk around of the Aquaclear, talk about how I'm going to test them. We're testing 3 at a time. 2 are on one tank. I know somebody might be like, that's not really a very good test. Relax, man. Relax. We'll find lots of ways to test them. And honestly, what might happen is that 50 might move to a different tank after a little bit, after that first month. And not necessarily a new tank, but another tank that could use a little extra flow. It might show up there. I gotta figure out some logistics first. But Let me know down in the comments below. Have you gotten a hold of a new Aquaclear? Are you just not interested? Your old Aquaclear works perfectly fine. You just take the lid off, or you put a weight on it, whatever it may be, to prevent that rattle from happening. You refuse to use an Aquaclear, you will only use the Penguin 350B or the Tidal. Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.